Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly 90-minute deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Dave. I'm a parent of a daughter in college, and we live in Chicago, Illinois.
My name is Lisa. I'm a clinical psychologist and a college counselor. I am a parent of a boy in elementary school, a girl in middle school, and a girl in college. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college counselor in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis is a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she's getting her master's degree at North Carolina State.
This week in the news, ex-dean at Temple indicted on charges of manipulating rankings. An article by Scott Jaschik of Inside Higher Ed. Our question from a listener is it easy to switch majors in college? Our interview is part 4 of 4 with Mark Kantrowitz on the new Simplified FAFSA. And our college spotlight comes to you from South Carolina, and it is Clemson University.
And friends, we have a couple really exciting announcements today. And, we talk about our listening family, and we mean it because everybody contributes to this podcast, making it what it is. And shout out to Mr. Mason from Mississippi, who sent in what we thought was a fantastic idea. And he said, "Your College Bound podcast team, as a tribute to Anika, can we keep the transitions with her voice? It'll be a good memory of her." And we're going to do that. So, Anika's voice, you hear her come on when it says, "Now it's time for a question from a listener." This week in the news, we're going to keep Anika's voice. Never even thought of that idea. So shout out to James with a fantastic idea. Secondly, I got to give a shout out to my main man right here, Dr. David Williams. He had another excellent idea as well. He said, as a tribute to Anika, Mark, can you do a college spotlight on North Carolina A&T for next week? And I said, that's another great idea. So we moved things around and shook it up a little bit, and that's our second tribute to Anika. Lastly, now you remember last week I said, it's time for your College Bound Kid Plus. And we rolled out a special feature perk just for college counselors. Well, this week we're rolling out one I'm even more excited about. It's for everybody. And let me explain how it works. So what I'm planning on doing is recruiting students who are currently at colleges. So if it was Elon, we might tap Lisa's daughter, Lily. If it's Yale, we may tap Dave's daughter, Lauren, just so you get a feel. But putting a little panel together, 3 or 4 students, different students, male, female, different races, ethnicities, interests, maybe get a senior, maybe get someone with the first-year experience, and have 1-hour sessions where your college-bound kid listeners can come in and ask questions to students. And if you've got a school, if your child's got a school on their college list, just make up any school. Let's say it's University of Wisconsin-Madison. Put together 3 or 4 people that are currently there, have a 1-hour session. I'm looking at 9 p.m. Eastern time because that's 6 p.m. Pacific time. And that's what we did before when we did a similar kind of thing like this with admission officers. And 1 hour. And so in order to test the interest in this, put together a little survey Lisa and I worked on together, and you're going to see it in the show notes. And it's just going to ask 6 basic questions. First of all, are you interested? Secondly, it's going to ask what state you're from and whether you're a college counselor or a parent, a few things like that. And then a very, very important question would be list any college that you would attend if we put the students together, because the way we're going to come up with the list of colleges is by seeing who you request. And so I'll take a look, and if we add them all up and, there's a tremendous amount for Notre Dame, then we'll put together one for Notre Dame. And so that's why your participation is very important. We are asking for $10 per family for these events. And the only reason we're asking for that, 100% of that will go to the students. We're going to get students and have them give up their time like this, like to give them an Amazon gift card. So all proceeds coming in would go to the students. But to me, I have increasingly become passionate about the fact that there's no substitute to really understanding what these schools are like than having conversations with actually students who are there. And one thing you can tell about students, they do not care about marketing the institution. They know how to keep it real. Anyway, Dave, any thoughts of this? Would this have been helpful for you when you were going through with Lauren? If we could have had a panel of 3 or 4 kids and you came on? And
I think it sounds outstanding. Yes, I think it's going to be extremely helpful. I know my daughter would be excited to participate. I think there's another outstanding resource as part of the college-bound kid family, as we say.
So, my kids, they banned me from using certain types of slang and talk, right? Because I'm too old for it. But I'm going to break one of the rules anyway. This is what my kids would say. That's next level.
Next level.
That's next level stuff. So anyway, your college-bound kid plus next level. I think very excited about it. It's really good for anybody. It's good for college counselors to learn about colleges. But if you're a senior or a junior and you're working on your college list, you've got some tough questions and you want the straight truth, fire it away. So
awesome. Look
for a link in the show notes, and that's going to run really for the foreseeable future. We're not just talking about putting that on 172. We're going to keep it in there, and as the responses come in, we'll build our list of colleges, and you'll be hearing a lot more about this. But excited. You could probably tell in my voice. All right, Dave, it's time to transition. Okay, friends, for the admissions tip. So if you look at the specific questions that a college asks you, it will reveal so much to you about what they value. That is the tip, but I'm going to give you a concrete example to hammer it home. We're doing a call spotlight on Clemson today. Clemson has a very unique required section in their application. They call it community standards, and they pepper their applicants with 6 questions. And I'm going to read them to you. And I think you can tell something Clemson values when you hear this. 1, have you ever been convicted of a crime other than a minor traffic violation? Yes, no. 2, are there any criminal charges currently pending against you? Yes, no. 3, have you ever entered a plea of guilty, a plea of no contest, a plea of nola contendere? I don't know what that is. Is that French, Dave?
Oh, no contendere. In other words,
contendere.
We're not even going to put up a defense, baby. We guilty.
Contendere. That's where you get to laugh at me, Dave. All right. And then it says an Alford plea to criminal charge or a plea under a First Offender Act. Yes, no.
Yeah.
Next, have you ever been suspended or expelled for any reason from high school, college, university, or post-secondary educational institution? Yes, no. Next, do you have a restraining order, an order of protection, or any other form of legal injunction pending against you in any jurisdiction? Yes, no. Lastly, do you currently have disciplinary charges, non-academic or academic, pending against you from a high school, college, university, or post-secondary institution? I don't know any school that has those 6 questions that they ask, and that tells you something about them as an institution. You might love it or you might not like it, but look to the college-specific questions to learn about the culture of the school. That's my tip.
That's right.
All right, Dave. I was feeling so sorry for my man. He was getting roasted on social media. Last week, he didn't get a push, and there was talk on social media. It was like, obviously, Lauren goes to an IB school. So, Dave, why don't you break it down? Why don't you break that down for our listeners here?
Well, actually, the University of Chicago Lab School does not have AP courses. That's because they feel they're the lab school, so they don't need AP courses. What they have, advanced topic courses, which allows them to teach pretty much anything they want. So that's why I was never familiar with the AP terminology, since my daughter never technically took AP courses. She took AT courses. So if it was a tush, I would have known it.
So we got to cut you some slack, but we had a nice little laugh at your expense. But we're going to try another one this week, and it is OMBA. What is OMBA, Dave?
OMBA. Well, if it was, oh, my Negro buttocks, I have no idea.
Man, whose mind thinks like yours? What is that?
I'm in Chicago, man.
OMBA stands for Online MBA. So that's what we're actually talking about
MBA.
today.
That makes sense.
Yes, this is what we're talking about today with Temple. So OMBA. So I'll keep adjusting my dynamic scoring. When you get them right, you get harder. When you get them wrong, they get easier. So next week, you look for me to ratchet it down a little, my friend.
Well, folks, if you're coming through the South Side, you can still use OMBA at the other definition.
So one thing I think, people are probably thinking, Dave has a lot of references to guns and bullets. Like, is Chicago that bad? And I think one thing that people don't realize is he's an emergency medical doctor on the South Side, which means he's taking bullets out of gangbangers every time he's on a shift.
Well, not every time, just mostly on the weekends.
The weekends. Okay, still. So he has guns and gunshots on his mind so much. Okay, friends, this time my big number is really a big number. I know some people are like, come on, Stuck. You're talking about a big number. You're throwing out 44, 42, 41, 7. It's not a big number. This time we have a real big number, and it's 1.71 trillion.
Whoa.
1.71 trillion. And that is the amount of student debt, which is at an all-time high. And just to put that in perspective, it was not that long ago when credit card debt was much more than student debt. Now credit card debt is $756 billion, literally half of student loan debt. It wasn't that long ago when auto loan debt was more than student debt. Auto loan debt, everybody's auto loans combined, 1.35 trillion. Student loan debt is now 20% more than auto loan debt. The only debt that exceeds student loan debt is what, Dave? What do you think it is?
Probably the national debt.
Well, that's probably true. It's mortgage loans.
So
it'll
loans,
never quite catch that. That's at 10.31 trillion. But it's second only to mortgage loans. 1.71 trillion, our big number.
It is.
All right, Dave, take it away, my friend. Let's turn to college hot topics in the news.
All righty, we have an article from a familiar name, Scott Jaschik, Inside Higher Ed. And this is that the ex-dean at Temple has been indicted on charges of manipulating rankings. Okay, Mark, you got to tell me if I get this pronunciation right. The dean is Moshe Porat, is that correct?
That one I didn't know. Can't help you with that. I was going to look it up and see if I could see him interviewed and didn't quite make it onto my to-do list because I thought that was going to come up. So we'll go with that and hope that nobody knows him. But he's been there for 40 years.
Well, we'll go Dean Moshe.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay. Well, this is the former Temple dean of their business school. He's still on the faculty, but he has been indicted by the Justice Department on several federal charges. One is conspiracy to commit wire fraud, one count, and actually another count of wire fraud. And if he's convicted, he could serve up to 25 years in prison and $500,000 fine. And this is where you go, OMBA, what did he do? So what he did was, let's give you a background first. Dean Moshe, from 1996 to 2018, was the dean of Temple's Fox Business School. So that's his first mistake, associating with Fox. But that's another story. He earned over $600,000 a year as dean. And even now, even though he's the ex-dean, he still earns a current salary of $318,000. But he has not taught a class since 2018. And he and two other of his colleagues were indicted. And according to the federal government, the three of them worked together to submit false information about the school's online MBA and part-time MBA programs to the U.S. News and World Report in order to inflate Fox's rankings. So what did they do? Well, they looked at several factors: the number of students that had taken the GMAT, the average work experience, and the percent of students that were enrolled part-time. And they manipulated those figures in order to make them seem more impressive than they actually were. For example, they said that all of their students submitted test scores. Well, in fact, only 20% of them did. So the question is, how effective were they? Well, the answer is very effective. Between 2015 and 2018, according to this indictment, they got the number one ranking in their category from the U.S. News and World Report. And more importantly, because of that number one ranking, they saw their student number increase from 70 in 2015 to almost 356 2 years later. So a stunning increase. And so according to Lillian Perez, the assistant special agent of the FBI for that district, quote, Moshe Porat knew that burnishing the MBA program would make Fox more competitive, bring in more students and more dollars. But countless applicants made big decisions based on lies at the heart of this conspiracy. So, Mark, I'm going to stop now and throw this open for discussion. What say you?
Wow, I was surprised a dean of a business school that doesn't have the largest endowment in the world was making over $600K. But he was getting a lot of money. So, several things. And by the way, great setup there, Dave. So lots of things are going through mine. One is, we've said this before, how it is a buyer's market. This shows the inordinate level of pressure that admissions folks feel to inflate their rankings. Not just rankings. I've said this before, right? There's multiple ways in which, quote unquote, the public keeps track of a good school. In my opinion, there's four main ways that I'm aware of. One is you just bounce it off everybody you know and you get a certain reaction. Great school, or they're a little silent. So that forms a little sense in your mind as to whether a school is good. What do those who you respect think about the school? But there are three other much more objective measures that tend to all be manipulated. One is rankings, which was what we're talking today. The other is test scores, which are often manipulated. And then the other is acceptance rates. In fact, I was talking to a friend of mine who has over 40 years experience doing this, and we talk usually twice a year, do deep dives and keep up with each other, and we bounce notes off each other and how the year went. And we were just having this exact conversation, specifically about how colleges manipulate their test scores. And they do it in so many different ways. They'll say, apply again in a year and we'll consider you, or apply for spring admission. Or it's why they can be a lot more generous sometimes for transfer admits, because they don't have to include the scores in their profile. And so scores are one way schools do manipulation. Acceptance rates, we've talked about things like Snap apps, VIP apps, Fast apps. We've talked about the fact there's no formal definition of an app. Literally, for one school, you could just click a couple boxes and they'll throw it in their app numbers. Another school might require you to submit everything. But one place where there's a lot of manipulation is rankings. And Temple's not the first one to be caught. Multiple schools have been caught over the years. And I've listed some of them in past episodes. But the pressure, Dave, that schools feel knowing that their applicant flow and their matriculation and their yield is tethered to rankings, is borne out by the desperation of his actions. And what bears it out even more is the statistics that you read. In 2013, 70 students enroll in their online MBA. Fast forward a few years later, 2015, it's 198. Fast forward 2 years later, 2017, and it's hitting 356. Literally 5 times as many students enrolled. And there was no doubt in anybody's mind that was tied to the fact that they got their number one ranking. Now, the lawsuit came in because people pushed back and said, part of why I paid for this was what I felt was a certain value in the marketplace. And if that was based on false data, then I've got a lawsuit against you. And the article goes on about how Temple, they didn't admit guilt, but they did decide to settle. You know how that is. You don't admit guilt, but you settle. Yeah, they gave a substantial amount of money to settle it.
I think that's nolo contendere, by the way.
No, yeah, the word I don't know. I guess, by the way, I'm so bad I just got busted for my foreign languages. Now, I don't even know what that is. Is that Latin or French or what? What is it?
It sounds like Latin, but you know what? I just heard it because I watched some like Law and Order or something. I think
okay.
one of those.
Okay.
I went to the Academy of Law and Order, SVU, or something like that.
Anitra and Joy, that's their show. There's too much violence for me. I'm so thin-skinned. I don't like swearing and cussing, and I don't like seeing gunshots. Like, even on TV, I don't like seeing shooting, which makes it hard to watch movies. I'm so thin-skinned. I'm a wimp. I admit it. Law and Order is too violent for me to enjoy. But anyway, I missed that episode.
You have those genteel Atlanta sensibilities. Come to Chicago, my man.
Okay.
We'll give you a course of cussing
and shooting. All right. So a couple of my thoughts, bringing it back. One is the pressure schools feel and that they're under. And I hope people don't misconstrue what I'm about to say, because it's absolutely inexcusable to do what this dean did and to break laws. But there's a difference between something that is justifiable and something that's understandable. And it's not justifiable. It was wrong. And if he gets jail time, he deserves it. But it is understandable to me because I see the pressure that you're under, and how in the world can I get students when people feel like, of course you're going to tell me you're good. You're a salesperson trying to sell me on your school. I can go to objective sources like rankings and get the real skinny on you. And that's what people do. But another point I want to make is that rankings, like test scores, they give an illusion of precision that belies the facts. They give an illusion of precision that belies the facts. And so there are over 20 different rankings out there. Much more than that, but 20 even credible ones, you could say, if you can say that. And look at them. Schools are ranked all over the place. And if you're going to use rankings as part of your research, use multiple sources, because you see what happened on one source and some of them. And the other thing, if you're going to use rankings, study their methodology. And finally, don't put too much weight on rankings. You know, do you want to outsource your view of beauty to somebody else, or do you want to come up in your own mind with what factors are important to you? So those are some of my thoughts, Dave. Any other thoughts you have?
Well, the article, it's actually sort of funny because they actually make reference to the fact that the reason that this dean went down this path was in 2012. They actually had a meeting with U.S. News and World Report. Yes. And they sort of asked them, hey, how do you guys audit the data we give you? And U.S. News Report basically said, we don't. I mean, we just rely on your honor. We don't have the staff to actually check on every information that's sent to us. And they said, you don't. So it was almost like a huge temptation.
Yeah. And to follow up on that, there's a source out there called Poets and Quants, and they specialize in ranking business schools, and they have all kinds of, updates on business school rankings. And they were actually the ones that busted Temple because they noticed that Temple had only reported 25% of their students had submitted test scores in 1 year. And then the next year, 33% had submitted. And then it went to 100%, 100%, 100% right after that. And they're like, wait a minute, this is a little fishy. You're trying to tell me 1/4 submit and 1/3 submit, because Temple's a test optional school, by the way. So they go from 1/4, and then they're not just test optional now. They've been test optional for a while. So you go from 1/4 to submitting 1/3, and then all of a sudden 100, 100, and 100. So yeah, so Poets and Quants blew the whistle, and then U.S. News looked into it, and then they got busted. But David, do you agree with me? Like, this sort of reveals the pressure that people are on to try to find some way to differentiate yourself. And believe it or not, it reminds me a little bit of Rick Singer. Rick Singer got busted.
Yep.
But other people are doing shenanigans out there. And we know because Wake Forest got busted doing this. George Washington got busted fabricating the rankings, and several others as well.
The rankings really, and when you look at the categories, they're completely arbitrary. The distinctions between even the schools, the numbers between the categories themselves are completely meaningless. It almost reminds me of similar rankings where they talk about like the best cities in the world to live, or the United States to live.
And they have me up there in North Dakota and Wyoming, and I'm like, no, thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They always, the best city is always someplace in Willamette, Minnesota.
I apologize if we have any listeners there.
Yeah, sorry. I'm going to get some angry emails. I'm sure it's a great place. I actually just made it up. So if there is a Willamette, I'd be shocked.
Well, first I thought you were talking about Oregon because there is a Willamette there.
That's right. Well, let's just say the Oz. Because they say, Cousin Oz, everybody is green. And we've just decided that green is the most important statistical feature that we have in our rankings. It's completely arbitrary and it's completely meaningless.
Let me hammer home your point.
Yeah.
Then I'm going to pick on U.S. News. So U.S. News for years has relied heavily on what they call reputational rankings. And so what they do is they send deans, senior level people like presidents and provosts, a very, very lengthy document. And they have to rank other institutions that they put in their category. So if they're a national university versus a regional versus a liberal arts school, they have to rank them. Okay. And I can't tell how many people are saying, I don't even know anything about these schools.
Absolutely.
How am I supposed to rank them? And that has traditionally been 25% of the U.S. News score.
Right.
So yeah, okay, I've heard this school's good, or I think it's good. But I don't know anything about it. So that's just an example of how arbitrary this can be.
Yes, right. And you know, there's such a regional myopia in colleges as well. I can tell you that having gone undergrad in the East Coast, I would say 90% of the people who actually study in the East Coast remained in the East Coast and knew virtually nothing about the Midwest or the South or even the West other than Stanford.
Yeah.
You know, and so it's not just it's a complete ignorance of the institutions involved. And so it's literally the blind leading the blind, which is why I completely agree that these rankings are more than just arbitrary. They're just inaccurate at best.
Well, here's the thing about the rank. Let me say this. Most colleges that are ranked really high, unless there is fabricated data, most of them are very good schools. I'm going to say that they're very good schools, okay?
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean they're very good for your child. That's the key. I mean, if it's a school in the city and your kid would die in the city, you know, then it's not for you. If it's a huge school and your child wants something smaller and intimate, I could go on and on and on. If it's single gender and they do better co-ed or vice versa. So that's the problem. The other thing about rankings, the majority of them, is that they basically measure prestige. So, Dave, any final comments at all?
Well, it's really just reinforcing what we've always been preaching on this podcast. You know, we're not saying totally disregard the rankings, but recognize the limitations of rankings, recognize that rankings have a very small role in determining the future success of any particular individual, and recognize that there's so many other things that should go into any student's choice of a college other than the rankings. And this just illustrates how rankings can be easily manipulated to the point of irrelevancy. So it's just reinforcing what we're always been preaching and that we will continue to preach on this podcast.
Yeah, and I just want to make one last point to agree with Dave. So most of the times when I rail against the rankings, and it's one of my favorite things to rail against, I emphasize the lack of individuality. I emphasize the fact that they give a precision. They give an illusion of precision that belie the facts. I emphasize the fact that just because a school is very good, it doesn't mean it's a good match or fit for you. But this is introducing another element, which is you don't even know if you have accurate data because there's so much pressure on schools to be high up in these rankings that it invites corruption. And sure, you're not going to hear many cases of a 40-year dean getting thrown in the slammer, but there have been at least 8 cases that have become public in the pretty recent future where people have been caught manipulating their rankings. And so if there's 8 that have come public, how many are really going on behind the scenes? So it's just another reason to be a little distrustful of rankings. Is the data even accurate? So, all right, I think we're beating a horse, Dave. Time to get off beating a horse. Move on to other things.
Okay.
It's time for a question from one of our listeners. Friends, I'm here with Lisa kicking it off for her inaugural question from a listener, but it doesn't feel like it's really that way with me because other than Dave, Lisa, you're the one I probably talked to the most last year.
Well, that's an honor, Mark. It really is.
Well, our first-time listeners, like Lisa and I co-counseled together for like 50 families. And so we were always talking, meeting in Zoom. And so It feels just natural. So why don't we take it away? And I'm excited to have this. Let's do it.
Okay. Well, this week's question from a listener is from Sammy, a dad in Georgia. And he asks, right now, my daughter thinks she wants to study English, creative writing, or possibly journalism. But what happens if she gets into college and changes her mind? Is it easy to switch majors in college, or does she need to know what she's going to study before she arrives?
I really love that Sammy sent this question in because it's actually an extremely important question. It's something I don't think as many people think about as maybe should. And the reason is there's just a lot of different college models out here. And I'll share some stuff, Lisa. And I know that your daughter, Lily, I'm trying to remember because I know we worked together. She looked at journalism. Yes. So I'm going to have you chime in a little bit toward the end just about your experience with journalism, because I know you looked at a lot of the top journalism schools in the country. But once again, I have to go with that classic admissions phrase, it depends. So, I say there's like 6 different models out there in relation to this question. So let's kind of take it almost on a continuum. So your most restrictive would be schools like UT Austin, where you apply into a major, they admit by major, and they make it extremely difficult to switch once you're there. And I had a conversation with Miguel, who's a high-level VP up there in their admission office, and he was like, Mark, if we admit you into biomedical engineering, it's not that easy to move into electrical. You kind of really need to know what you want to do. So that's like on the most restrictive side. You don't see that often, but it is out there. And you'll see schools like Cal Poly, SLO. They flat out tell you need to choose a major on your application. You cannot apply without a major. And so that's like the really most restrictive side. Then you get other schools like, take a school like Rice. Well, they have different schools, and this is pretty common for universities where they'll have divisions. They either call them divisions, colleges, or schools. And at Rice, if it's engineering, if it's humanities, if it's natural sciences or social sciences, there's a lot of flexibility. But when it comes to music and architecture, you're applying directly into that program. So there are schools that, it varies depending on your program. And then you've got other schools that admit by major, but they're make it relatively easy to switch and move around. UMass Amherst comes to mind. They're admitting by major, and they read by major, not by school group. And one of the ways you can sometimes tell if they're admitting by major is they'll ask you right on the application, what major are you applying to? And that a lot of times they'll say, what's your second choice? And they'll make it clear if you don't put because they'll look and see, are you competitive in your first choice? If not, your second choice. And if you don't put a second choice, then they just won't admit you. So those are schools that are a lot more restrictive. And then I want to get to some which would be the majority, that are a lot more flexible. Do you want to talk at all, Lisa, about UIUC, which is University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign?
Yeah. They are kind of a hybrid. They do have some really restrictive programs. For instance, if you apply into their business school, it's the kind of thing where you can go out, but you can't get in again. It's extremely hard for people who decide they want to do business in their sophomore year to get into that school, and they're usually advised to transfer. The same is true for like their computer science and their engineering. They do have an undecided track there, and they do have like the School of Arts and Sciences, things that are much broader that people can switch majors back and forth. But they do have some really restricted programs there.
Yeah, and by the way, that computer science program, that's one of the most brutal in the country to get into. I saw somewhere that this year it was either 2 or 3% acceptance rate into that program.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So that's good. So we're kind of moving almost along a continuum of from most restrictive to most wide open. So then you get to what's a really common model, which is you've got a big university, but they've got colleges or schools, sometimes called divisions within the university, and you're applying into that college or that school, and it's hard to move to another college, but you can just move whenever you want within the college. So an example of that, I'll use the University of Pennsylvania. They've got 4 colleges. They've got nursing, which only has 100 people, but you're applying into the School of Nursing directly out of high school. They've got Wharton, the business school. And then they've got engineering, they've got arts and sciences, which is the biggest one. And so arts and sciences has all kinds of majors. So if you're moving around from biology to sociology philosophy. That's all in arts and sciences, and you can do that whenever you want. And, you'll see that model at other places too, where you're applying into a college within the university. Very, very common model at bigger universities. Cornell uses this, Duke uses this, Carnegie Mellon, just to name a few other schools. And then another model is similar, but you apply into the university as a whole. And so initially when you apply, there are no admit by majors or even by colleges. I'm talking about a place like Emory. So Emory's a whole giant liberal arts and sciences school for the most part. They're not looking to admit by major, but once you're at the school, they have specialized programs where you have to apply to get into the program. Usually after somewhere in your sophomore year, you have to apply if you're interested in programs like nursing and business. And so that's a model. And then the last one would be just what I would call just the pure liberal arts model, which would really be what I would say Chicago would be, where there's, it's an interdisciplinary way of training the mind. You can move around willy-nilly wherever you want. There are going to be requirements for a major to graduate, but it's not like you need special permission. I mean, you might need an advisor to sign off on something, but it's not like special qualifications or anything if you decide you want to switch. Lisa, didn't you say, because I'm using Chicago because Lisa went there, didn't you say you switched majors like 7 times?
Yeah, I can't even keep track. I mean, I was, a linguistics major one week, a history major the next, sociology, then finally I started out in psychology and then I finally came back to it. It took me a long time to make up my mind. But I mean, that's good because I learned about a lot of different things on the way to that.
Yeah. And so when I'm working with someone, if they don't know really, this is what I want to do, this is an important conversation I like to have with them is let's talk about the flexibility of the different schools and how much they will allow you to maneuver around. For the most part, for English, Sammy's talking about his daughter with English. For the most part, that's not going to be that big of a deal because if she's at a liberal arts and science college, no big deal, move around, whatever. If she's applying into a college, that's generally in a large college that's going to have lots of options for her. And she's unlikely to want to switch to engineering or something like that anyway. At least that's my experience with English majors. Journalism, it can be a little trickier. Let's talk about your experience with journalism and the schools that you looked at, Lisa.
Well, I would say there are kind of 3 categories of schools that Lily ended up applying to. And the first one I would say would be the one she's attending now, Elon University. And Elon, you can go in, they don't even care what major you are. And you have, your time to pick. I don't think you can even declare a major till your sophomore year there. Other schools that we looked at, and this I would say Indiana University, the University of Missouri, you would get admitted to the college. And then if you qualified, you could get directly admitted into the journalism school. So, because of her ACT score and GPA right off the bat, she got into Indiana University's journalism school. But that being said, you can also go in undecided, complete the prerequisites, they call it pre-journalism prerequisites, and then get admitted to the journalism school at those institutions. So there's kind of a hybrid. One program, I think it's at the University of Maryland. She applied there, and there she got admitted to the School of Journalism. And they offered her a scholarship. I don't think there was a ton of flexibility to, let's say, transfer to the School of Advertising and Public Relations. You got into that program and, you were kind of encouraged to stay in that program. So it was kind of among the 3 because Lily wasn't totally, she likes journalism, she likes communications, but who knows what she'll end up doing. I felt more comfortable with her going to a place where she could just switch majors kind of at will. And yeah, she might have to do an extra semester or something like that, but it was worth it for her to have that flexibility.
Yeah, and the Big Ten Conference in general is, they're pretty strict on where you're applying, and you're being evaluated based on the program that you declare. Mm-hmm. That's pretty common. Now, I will say this. There are a lot of schools that, I'm just talking about admission here. So they may not admit you into a specific program, but if you indicate an interest in a particular major, then they will look at your applications through that prism. Right. And so, for example, if you express interest in majors that are high concentration of reading and writing, there would be a tendency to look more at your English grades and your English curriculum and also your testing in that area, where if you're more STEM based, they're going to focus a lot more on your math science curriculum. your courses, your testing in that area. And so that's on the evaluation side. But I'm kind of getting a little off Sammy's questions. He wants to know about the flexibility of moving around. And I wanted to kind of go over all the range out there, but the majority of the schools are pretty flexible, particularly for something like English. Journalism can be a little bit more restrictive based on, Lisa broke that down well for us. Anything else you want to throw in, Lisa?
Well, I mean, I guess I would say to Sammy that, if your daughter's not sure what she wants to do, it would be important to prioritize colleges that are really flexible on her list of places that she applies so that she'll have lots of options. I kind of think it's unfair to ask 16, 17-year-olds what they want to do for the rest of their life and force them in a track to commit to that. Because I think that's, we call that in psychology identity foreclosure. Like you pick one track before you really know who you are and what you want to do. So I personally prefer schools that are more open.
I agree. I completely agree. And the fact that 75% of kids change their majors is a test to that. Oh, by the way, you guys, you get admission vernacular from me. Expect to get psychology vernacular from
That's
Lisa.
right.
She's been a therapist for 20 years. She has her doctorate from Northwestern and practices, in addition to doing college counseling, she also does, the mental therapy piece. So she's going to be throwing all kind of words out there. You're going to get better on your vocab.
You're all going to know about psychotherapy and treatment and diagnosis by the end of this podcast, I'm sure.
Oh, you're going to start getting questions like, analyze me. And I'll just sit back and watch and relax and take that episode off.
Oh, great.
Awesome. Well, Sammy, hopefully that was helpful. If not, send us a follow-up and we'll clarify it.
And now, this week's interview with a special guest.
Okay, friends, the final part of my interview with Mark Kantrowitz. And if you're wondering, why is he not on the hot seat? Because he's a repeat guest. You don't go on the hot seat on your second visit. So no hot seat in the final part. But Mark does go in some depth onto some of the new ways in which the Pell Grant is being calculated through a simple lookup table. And he talks about the benefit of early awareness. He talks about the simplified need test, and he talks about changes to untaxed income in the new FAFSA and why he thinks it's a good change. And finally, Mark closes by talking about some additional changes that he wished would have occurred in this new simplified FAFSA. And he gives his overall take on the legislation. I know it's a little technical interview, and I was asking Dave, Lisa, what do you think about this? Dave, what did you say? You said sometimes you just got to take your spinach or something like that?
Oh, yeah. Oh, well, sometimes, yeah, you just have to gnaw the bone. What they used to see in our church, sometimes the Bible is like milk. It's easy to digest. Other times it's like meat. You have to sort of like chew, and sometimes you just got to gnaw the bone.
No, I remember you saying, you know what? You said sometimes, you said, what can you say? You're in Deuteronomy in the Bible, man. It's Deuteronomy and Leviticus. So it's gonna be technical, but it's necessary. That's what you said. So
That's right.
Listen and enjoy. Great. Let's talk about Pell Grant eligibility. Because I know there's a change in how Pell Grant eligibility is going to be calculated, a couple different methods, and I've heard it may be easier for some students to qualify for Max Pell. Talk to us about changes in how Pell Grant eligibility is going to be calculated under FAFSA simplification.
So the old method was to calculate your EFC, and if your EFC was less than 90% of the maximum Pell Grant for that year, you would get a Pell Grant based on the difference between the maximum Pell Grant and your EFC. So if you had a zero EFC, you get the maximum Pell Grant. And there was also a minimum Pell Grant that is 10% of the maximum. And that's why you have that 90% cutoff. The new formula has that same formula, but in terms of the student aid index, it also has a second formula, which is based on a comparison of your income, your adjusted gross income, to a multiple of the poverty line. And there's going to be two sets of formulas for this poverty line based measure. One will be if your income is below a certain multiple of the poverty line, you will get the maximum Pell Grant, regardless of what the other formula says. And then there's another formula for if your income is below that threshold, you will get at least the minimum Pell Grant. In between, the old formula will determine what your actual Pell Grant is. But the benefit of this is that you'll be able to have a simple lookup table that says where you look up what your income is, and there's going to be a few columns, one for dependent students, another for independent students, and another for single parent households. But it'll be a simple lookup table where you look up what your income is, and it'll tell you that you're getting the maximum Pell Grant. And the benefit of this is that it enables what's called early awareness, where educators can go into middle schools, even elementary schools, and ask simple question, what's your income? Or they may not even need to do that. Like if the student's receiving the free and reduced price school lunch, you know that their family income is under 135% of the poverty line. And you can say, you're getting the maximum Pell Grant. And it's currently $6,495. I mean, that's the current one. I mean, obviously, in the future, it'll be higher. And so that will then provide a motivation for those students to do better in school so they can go to college. It shows them that college is a possibility. And that can have a huge, huge impact on which students enroll in college and ultimately graduate from college. And it's part of, we needed to simplify the formula. From the perspective of the students, it's going to be simpler, simple lookup table. Underlying, it's still going to be a complicated formula, but the students don't need to know that formula. All they need to know is they're getting the maximum Pell Grant, or they're getting at least the minimum Pell Grant. And that will make it easier for them to see that they can get money for college.
Are these automatic lookup tables, is that similar to the automatic zero student aid index, or is that different?
The automatic student aid index is a different methodology. It's not at all related. And the automatic, there's also the simplified needs test now has a new name, which is about disregarding assets. Now, if you qualify for the maximum Pell Grant based on income, you're going to be treated as automatically having a zero student aid index. But for the equivalent of the simplified needs test, where assets are being disregarded, it's still a somewhat complicated formula, but it is it's a little bit simpler. So there used to be an income threshold of $50,000. Now it's going to be $60,000. Also, it used to be you had to satisfy the income threshold and either the type of tax return or eligibility for means-tested federal benefits, that you were dislocated and you didn't have a job. The new method with regard to the federal means-tested benefits is if you qualify for one of these federal means-tested benefits, you get the Pell Grant. There's no income threshold involved. But if you don't have one of those means-tested federal benefits, then the income threshold is used along with not the type of tax return, but whether you had to file one of several schedules. So A, B, D, E, H, I. I don't remember the exact letters. Schedule C is if your income and your net business income on Schedule C was greater than $10,000 or less than a $10,000 loss, then you were not eligible for the simplified needs test. It's still fairly complicated, but it's at least a little bit easier.
Yeah, this stuff is complicated. We're trying our best to break it down.
Let's take a break to learn about Mark's recommended resource for the week.
Friends, the recommended resource for episode 172 is unigo.com, unigo.com. And quite frankly, I'm surprised it took me 172 episodes to get to this one. It's a multifaceted website that has a number of purposes. One of my favorite things about Unigo are the college reviews, and do they have them? How's 650,000 college reviews sound like? Another thing are the stats section. There's great information to help on paying for college, and perhaps what Unigo's best known for is its scholarship search. They have over 3.6 million scholarships and grants that can be searched. and the account is free. They also have a great Q&A section. You can look at some of the difficult questions that people have. And what I like is it's not just one response. You get multiple responses. So unigo.com. We'll now return to my interview with Mark Kantrowitz. What about untaxed income? My understanding is there's some changes in how untaxed income is calculated with FAFSA simplification. Is that correct?
Right. So there used to be a question on the FAFSA called cash support. It appeared only on the student section of the FAFSA, not on the parent section of the FAFSA. The form of untaxed income. Most common ways that it would manifest is, let's say the grandparents gave a gift to the grandchild. If they gave the gift to the grandchild, it would be reported as untaxed income on a subsequent year's FAFSA. If they gave it to the parents, it wouldn't be reported at all. Or let's suppose that there was a 529 plan that was owned by the grandparent, college savings plan, and it's not reported as an asset on the FAFSA because it's not owned by the student or the parent, but it is any distributions would be reported as untaxed income to the student. Now, untaxed income can reduce aid eligibility by as much as half of that income amount. So that was a way that you had someone who was low income, nevertheless was having a severe increase in their EFC. Well, that question is going away. That's a positive change because you're no longer going to have this issue where someone gives money to the student or they get certain means-tested federal benefits or they get a distribution from a grandparent-owned 529 plan. It wipes out their aid eligibility. That's no longer going to be the case. And so this is a positive thing. And there's a lot of cross-currents in the simplification. The number in college, that going away means that middle and high income families that have multiple children are going to get less aid. But the cash support, if there's a grandparent-owned 529 plan, well, then that means they're going to get more financial aid. And there's a little bit of slop in this process. But the idea is that try to reduce the burden of completing the FAFSA so at least the low-income students are going to have an easier time of getting financial aid. The fact that you might have one or two high-income students getting, quote-unquote, undeserved financial aid, that's not that big a deal if it's enabling low-income students to get the financial aid they need to afford a college education. The focus of the forum should be on enabling low-income students to get financial aid and not on preventing high-income students from looking poor.
I like how you put that.
A step in the right direction. I think that there's one missed opportunity in the legislation, and that is to fix the problem with the asset protection allowance. They didn't change it in the simplification legislation. The asset protection allowance has been slowly disappearing since 2009-10. It's supposed to shelter a portion of the assets of the parents based on the age of the older parent. And it uses a complicated and arcane formula that just happens to be going down, down, and down. And within another year or two, it's going to be gone entirely. And so there are some proposals for ways to fix it. One would be to disregard money in college savings plans by the financial aid formula so that there's a incentive to save for college. Another would be to disregard assets entirely. But we'll see what Congress does. I think there are members of Congress who will propose various solutions to it, and maybe one of them will get enacted.
I can't see them disregarding assets entirely. So if somebody had $2 million in the bank, it wouldn't at all, reflect their ability to pay outside of their home equity or retirement accounts because those provisions are already there.
Well, normally, income and assets are strongly correlated. If you have enough assets to cause you to lose eligibility for need-based financial aid, you usually have enough income that would cause you to lose aid eligibility, even if assets were disregarded. And many federal means-tested benefit programs are based solely on income. They don't consider your assets. So like the free and reduced price school lunch, TANF, and WIC, it's based solely on your income. And maybe they could have something that says that if you have $1 million in the bank, don't apply. But the reality is that this is one of those questions that's designed to prevent wealthy students from looking poor, but doesn't do any benefit to the low-income students. And effectively, you're asking 6 questions about assets on the FAFSA that there is less than 1% of the families where it makes a big difference. So why are we requiring 99% of the families to jump through this hoop when it's not really needed?
So it sounds like you're saying it could be simplified even more by reducing some of the asset questions on the. I like the idea of savings, 529s and that kind of thing being exempt. That would be an incentive for savings, at least theoretically.
Yeah, I favor getting rid of assets entirely, but if they still want to have assets, let's exclude the 529 plans because there's this perceived penalty for saving, and there's actually a slight penalty for saving. Well, let's just get rid of it because it's better for the families, it's better for the nation to encourage people to save. Remains to be seen what Congress will do, though.
No, I agree with you. There's definitely a perceived savings penalty. And perception is something, as someone who works with families, you hear that all the time. I'm punished for my savings. So I think you're onto something there.
And there's a benefit to saving even small amounts. So if a low-income family has a 529 plan, even with just $50 for their child, it leads to a 30-fold increase in the likelihood of that child enrolling in college and graduating from college. This has a huge, huge impact. So we want to encourage families to save for college. The reason why it has an impact is it sets up an expectation that the child's going to go to college, and that makes all the difference. So even though more of the financial benefit will be realized by middle and high income families, the impact on access to college by low income students and their success in college is worth it.
Mark, I just want to thank you for your 3 decades of commitment to excellence, and you're always advocating for under-resourced kids, and you've been a champion for all kids, but your passion for the least of these comes through. And anytime I read anything you say or hear everything you say, and I think a lot of us out here really appreciate it. Now, please at least share your Twitter so that others can tap into some of your wisdom or any other way you want to share where people can access. I know you've got a website where you have white papers that you've written. Share some ways that our listeners can connect with your work.
So my Twitter handle is MKANT, and I post most of the new articles I wrote to Twitter. I have a website called studentaidpolicy.com, which has links to all my student aid policy analysis papers, more than 150 of them. I also own the website privatestudentloans.guru, which is a free site, doesn't carry any advertising, that gives tough love advice about borrowing private student loans. It's the only website about private student loans that says you shouldn't borrow private student loans. And I have several books, the most recent of which is How to Appeal for More College Financial Aid, which we talked about previously.
And that's also linked on our website, by the way. If you just go yourcollegeboundkid.com under the resources tab and then hit books, you'll see Mark's book, and it'll take you right to, I think it's Amazon or wherever we linked it. You can get it right away there.
So lots of ways to follow me and to learn in what I do and to get the benefit of it. And I am quoted in lots of news media. So there are constantly new articles coming out in all the major publications where I provide my insights and advice to help you make a more informed, smarter decision.
Keep up the good work, Mark. We'll keep following you. And we also have discussed some of your articles as well on our podcast, so we'll continue to do that. So keep on keeping on, and we support you in any way we can.
Thank you.
Now it's time for our college spotlight of the week. All right, friends. Well, it is time for me to dive into Clemson University. And I can't wait to share with you a lot of what's going on at Clemson. So starting out, Clemson was founded in 1889 through a bequest from Thomas Green Clemson. Thomas Green Clemson then married John C. Calhoun's daughter, Anna Maria, and eventually they settled on her family plantation. So Clemson's founded on the Thomas Fort Plantation right in South Carolina. A longtime advocate for an agricultural college in upstate, Clemson left his home and his fortune to the state of South Carolina to create the institution that bears his name. In November of 1989, Governor John Richardson signed the bill accepting Clemson's gift, which established Clemson Agricultural College. Initially, Clemson Agricultural College was an all-white military school, which opened with 446 students. Later, it became a coeducational civilian institution, civilian just being the opposite of military. And that happened in 1955. And then in 1963, Clemson became the first traditionally white institution in South Carolina to desegregate since Reconstruction. So that's a little bit of overview of the history of Clemson. And history impacts the present, which is why I share it. Note the word agricultural came up there, and note the word military came up there. And you'll see later, we'll come back to both of those as we look at who Clemson is today. But Clemson, in a lot of ways, is sort of tough to categorize in a traditional sense. It's definitely not a city school. Definitely not that. It's definitely not a suburban school. I wouldn't quite call it rural, although some might disagree with that. It is remote. I guess the safest thing you really could call Clemson would be a nondescript, sleepy college town, in the sense that the entire area revolves around the college, and there really isn't much going on in the immediate vicinity. This 1,400-acre campus is surrounded by 17,000 acres of woods, farms, beautiful lakes, and beautiful mountains. And what is known as Clemson Bottoms is about a 10-minute walk from the heart of campus. Now, what is Clemson Bottoms? This is where the Calhoun Field Laboratory is located. What's the Calhoun Field Laboratory, you say? It is a large area dedicated to agricultural research. And scientists come from all over the world, not just the country, to do research at Clemson Bottoms. And it also includes a large student-run organic garden. Now, if you're looking for a budding metropolis, Clemson's not your place. The closest town of any size would be Greenville, South Carolina, and that's a full 45 minutes away. I drive through Greenville all the time on my way to visit Garrison. So that's a 45-minute drive away, and Greenville's not a budding metropolis. It has less than 70,000 students. So you got to go 45 minutes out to get a place with even 70,000 students. Clemson itself has less than 20,000 residents, with really the university making up the overwhelming number of these 20,000 residents. This is a place you really need a car for, to be honest. This is some schools you can get around without a car. Clemson would not be one of them. And to show how much Clemson University impacts Clemson, the town, Clemson was featured in quite a few articles when the pandemic really broke out about how the economy is being destroyed in some college towns that were completely dependent on the university. And then the university just went poof when everything closed. And then all the stores pretty much just dire straits for the economy. So Clemson has been a co-ed civilian school now for less than 70 years, but its heyday is right now. I have had more families ask me about Clemson in the last 2 years than in the previous 20. And that's partly because Dabo Swinney, you know Dabo, Dave?
Dabo, the coach of the national champions.
You got that right. Dabo Swinney has literally put Clemson on the map. Clemson is not only the national championships, as Dave said, they are the national championship twice over since 2016. They have become a juggernaut with no end in sight to their ascension. When you look at the other dominant football schools in the South, which is the region that dominates college football, other than every once in a while Ohio State, you're talking about schools like Alabama, Georgia, LSU, and Auburn. They all play in the SEC, and they pulverize each other and beat each other up, and only one comes out and survives. But Clemson is in the ACC, the Atlantic Coast Conference, so they dominate the ACC the way Gonzaga dominates the West Coast Conference in basketball, almost assuring that they will be one of the 4 teams invited into the college football playoffs. Now, how lucrative is this for Clemson and their business model? Well, let's take a look at some numbers here. So Dabo Swinney took a $1.25 million reduction, Dave, to his salary because of the pandemic this year. Because, obviously the crowds weren't coming into the games and, merchandise sales and things, right?
Yeah.
Take a guess how much he still earned after the $1.25 million reduction.
I bet you over $10 million.
Well, good guess. $8.9 million. So he would have earned over 10 if he didn't take that $1.25 million reduction. And his contract buyout is the second largest in all of college football. It's over $50 million. So if somebody wants to get him out of that contract, they got to pay Clemson $50 million just for the right to talk to him.
Whoa.
Now, why would Clemson pay Dabo Swinney $10 million? So I'm going to read a quote, and this appeared in the newspaper, big newspaper in South Carolina. The nickname of South Carolina is the Palmetto State, and that's the name of their newspaper. That's also the nickname for the state, the Palmetto State. So that's what the newspaper is called. So this appeared in the Palmetto State. It's back in 2017. Here's what it says. The week of the 2017 title game, so this was their first bite at the Big Apple, or maybe their second, but before they've won it since then. So keep in mind, all the stats I'm going to share with you are even greater now. But the week of the 2017 title game, the university had more than 250,000 visits to its website from people outside the region. So 250,000 visits to the website from people outside the region. 4,500 people browsed information on at least 3 undergraduate majors. 910 looked up campus tour information. 215 registered for tours. 1,000 people clicked on admission application materials, and another 760 looked at the university career information section. Furthermore, the 2017 game led to 27 million total social media impressions for Clemson, and they added 10,800 new followers. Now, what does all that mean? You're like saying, who cares about social media? Who cares about looking up tours? Well, let's get to the bottom line. Applications for Clemson have increased astronomically. In 2008, 15,542 students applied for freshman admission. Fast forward 10 years later, 2018, 28,844 students applied, an 86% increase. That's what they're getting for that $10 million salary, 86% increase in applicants. And school spirit around Clemson football is bustling and booming, reminiscent of other schools in the Southeastern Conference like LSU, Alabama, Georgia, and Auburn. Football is religion here, and it's helping Clemson to go from a South Carolina school, which is really what they were a decade ago, to right now I would categorize them as an East Coast regional school, but they're in the process of becoming a national school. So 69% of the students were from South Carolina a couple years ago. That number's down to 56%. All right, Dave, mascot guessing time. You love that. You ready for a hint?
Clemson, they're the Tigers, aren't they?
Oh,
No.
there, Dave knows his mascots. I didn't even need it. He didn't even see. He makes up for admissions vernacular with the mascots. I was going to give you a hint. They have the same mascot as 3 SEC schools, Auburn, LSU, and Missouri, but you didn't even need it. They're all the Tigers.
That's right.
Knows his mascots. And speaking about Tigers and school spirit, Tiger paws are all over that campus.
Right.
And so is orange, reflecting the school colors and the school mascot. And what you'll find with a lot of big-time schools in football is marching band goes with that. And at Clemson, they've got their own band field just for the band. But Dave sounded like you wanted to say something.
I was going to say that clearly they're aspirational because, of course, my alma mater was the Tigers, and we had orange, and we could have whooped Clemson with our debating team. But that's
By the way, Dave's humble, but he was like 6th ranked in Ontario in debate. I remember that coming out of high school. He was Mr. Master Debater, but he can't win against me, so that's all that matters.
That's right.
I got the facts on my side.
That's right. Go Clemson. I'll see you on the debating team. Trevor Lawrence don't got nothing on me.
Listen, Clemson scores very, very well in a number of survey results. Speaking about Princeton Review does this survey, and I'm going to be sharing a lot more information on this survey because I think people are going to find it fascinating. But They do a survey annually of at least 140,000 students. So that's a lot. What they do is they look at what they regard as the 386 best schools in the country, and they spend several weeks on a campus, or at least a week, talking to students, and they usually talk to about 400 kids on each campus. So, and then they do something which I love, Dave. They refuse to rank schools in an ordinal sense, saying this school is the third best, this school is the seventh best. But what they do is they do rankings in categories, which I'm cool with, right? It's just categories as opposed to it's when you try to put all the ingredients together and say this school is number 3, number 7. That's what I have a problem with. And they refuse to do that because they say you can't do it. But they do have rankings in 62 categories. And here's some of Clemson's rankings. And once again, this is based on these 400 surveys they do on all these campuses. They came in number 20 for best athletic facilities. They came in number 3 for everybody plays intramural sports. They came in number 4 for students pack the stadiums. And I hear you saying, Stuck, what about education? You're talking about football. What about education? Well, they did really, really well in job placement. They ranked number 2 for best career services. They ranked number 20 for best alumni network amongst any public school. They came in number 10 for public schools, 20 overall. And then they came in top 20 for public schools for best internships. So you're asking me, well, what are their great academic programs? So I'm going to list the most frequently enrolled programs where they have the most graduates. Number 1 is management. Number 2 is biological sciences. Number 3 is marketing. Number 4 is psychology. Number 5 is industrial engineering. Number 6 is mechanical engineering. Number 7 is nursing. Number 8 is financial management. And number 9 is computer science. And if you picked up a theme there, Clemson is a STEM school. It's known as a STEM school with strong business. So if you looked at basically 8 of those 9 majors were either STEM or business: management, biology, marketing, industrial engineering, mechanical engineering, nursing, financial management, computer science. So this is not, a haven necessary for social sciences, humanities. They're a STEM and business school, and that's what they're known for. They also have some other incredibly strong majors that didn't crack their top 9 or 10 for most graduates, but they're extremely strong. And some of those would be, remember what I said in the start about the history, Mr. Clemson had a passion for agriculture, and so that comes out in their very, very notably strong programs there. So they have a very strong animal and vet science program, strong agriculture, strong accounting. Anything agriculture is good here. They've got ag business is a really strong program, ag economics, agriculture, food science, and soil sciences. So those are some of their top majors. They also have an exceptional honors college. The honors college is consistently in the conversation of one of the top honors colleges in the country. And according to that same Princeton Review survey, they have some of the happiest students. So they ranked 11th on their survey for happiest students, and they ranked number 1 for the best town-gown relations. My theory on that, Dave, is the town is so small that every pizza place or whatever there, they love Clemson because they're totally their meal ticket.
That's right.
So what else can I tell you about Clemson? Well, I mentioned to you it's a mostly East Coast school that's in the process of becoming nationally. And that is reflected. If you look at the 11 states where they have the most students from, everyone is the East Coast. So I'll tell you the states in order of most students for their top 11. Number 1, South Carolina. Number 2, North Carolina. Number 3, Georgia. So that's all Southeast. Then they move into the Mid-Atlantic. Number 4, New Jersey. Number 5, Virginia. Number 6, New York. Number 7, Maryland. Number 8, PA. So 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 are all Mid-Atlantic. Then number 9 is Florida. Then they hit New England for number 10, which is Massachusetts, and number 11, which is Connecticut. So you've got Southeast, Mid-Atlantic, and New England, but it's all East Coast. They're all their top 11 states. So a few more points, Dave, and then I'm going to ask you what's jumping out at you here. And then before we get into stats. So I mentioned that Clemson was originally a military school. Well, ROTC continues to be extremely popular and very, very well-attended program at Clemson. And South Carolina is one of the most conservative states in the country. So not surprising, Clemson is a very conservative campus. In their recent mock election, Trump was more popular than Biden on campus. It was close. Trump won the mock election that I read up on, 51% to 49%. So the liberal voice is on campus, 51 to 49. But when you look at national numbers, Dave, take a guess, Mr. Political over there. What percentage of the 18 to 29 vote went to Biden nationally?
At national, 18 to 29, 80%.
No, it was 61-36.
Okay.
So there's a 25% point differential nationally. If Trump won 51-49 on that campus, you could argue that it's 27% more conservative than the average, campus. So that's just something to be aware of, and that's pretty common for a lot of South Carolina schools. Princeton Review also ranked Clemson, based on their surveys, the 10th most conservative campus in the country. Students tend to be very religious. They came in as the 14th most religious school. And Greek life, it's a pretty big Greek life school. In fact, I have a student who's going to Clemson, actually picked it over UGA this year for their honors program. And one of the concerns is the Greek life, because she's not into Greek life. And it's a very strong Greek life school. In fact, Manning, which is an all-girls dorm, has almost 50% of the women in sororities. So it's a pretty big Greek life school. Another thing about Clemson, and by the way, I was just there 3 weeks ago, it's very hilly. So get ready to burn some calories if you're going to walk it. It's about a 15-minute walk to walk all the way across campus with a good brisk walk, but those hills will get your cardio up a little there. Now let's look at the application itself. So they give you 3 options: the Common App, the Coalition, or the Clemson app. I've already read about their application certification and the 6 questions you have to answer. We talked about that earlier today. You have to list your complete academic history. So it reminds me a lot of the California schools. You would list all your courses and all your grades. And so you have to do that and then report your senior courses. They'll accept you at the end of your junior year. You self-report your standardized test scores initially, but then you do need to send them directly from the agency. They do like resumes, so you can upload your resume. They don't require them, but they like them. And it's a school that does look at your major. So they're going to ask you what your first choice major is, and that's important. And then they'll ask you your second choice. And so they're going to admit by major, with the major heavily in mind. They also ask about, I said, look at what they asked and know what they value. They ask about residency status, because they do value you being from South Carolina. And they ask about alumni status. So that's something that gets a little asterisk if you're an alumni or you're from South Carolina. No recommendations are required, but they will read them if you submit them. Recommendations are optional. No writing is required in terms of essay, but they encourage you to submit that, and they will consider it if submitted. Another marquee program for Clemson is called their Creative Inquiry Program. This is an undergraduate research program where more than 500 research projects are available for students, and this program started in 2005. And since 2005, it has engaged more than 34,000 students with over 1,000 different projects, ranging from drought-resistant crops and infrastructure to developing rocket population and food waste recovery. Another popular program is their Bridge to Clemson program. This started in 2006 and now has over 1,000 students. And this program, pretty much what they do is in early February, they identify students that they think are qualified to go to Clemson, but they just narrowly missed getting in. And they give them an opportunity to be part of a Bridge program. And so they take classes at Tri-County Technical College for 1 year. And if you can get a 2.5 grade point average, then you're auto-admitted automatically into Clemson. So they look at people that just missed admission, and they provide kind of an alternative route. But you should keep in mind that program, while it does guarantee admission, it does not guarantee admission into health science, nursing, production studios, sports communication, parks, recreation, and tourist management. There's a few majors that it's exempt from. So, Dave, I've pretty much given you the overview on Clemson. Other than the stats, what are your takeaways?
Well, it's hard. I'm a liberal from the north, and so it's hard being enthusiastic on a place that was probably a stop on the Underground Railroad.
Yeah, with the plantation.
But it's a great football power. It is a very conservative campus, but and academically, it's quite strong. So it certainly has its appeal, and I can certainly see how Dabo has increased the institutional profile. So quick question: what percentage of kids that apply get accepted?
47%. I'm about to go to stats.
It's fairly selective.
No. It's quite selective.
Yeah,
it's quite selective. When you increase your apps by 86%, you become a lot more selective, and that's what's happened. And I think some things that do make Clemson stand out. It is a very, very friendly school. It has that Southern genteel, everybody's friendly, and speaks to you. And it's got a lot of warmth like that.
Right.
And of course, there's a lot of rah-rah. So it's got a lot of good work-life balance. And it's got strong academic programs. Like, this is not a place where people are just coming in and going to sororities and partying and watching football and not graduating. Like, the job placement is incredible. Their internships are incredible. Their graduation rates, which I'll get to, are significantly above, national averages. And, it's got some very, very, very strong academic. Those programs I mentioned academically are exceptionally strong programs. So it is a really good academic institution, whether or not the culture is what you would want. A lot of students I work with don't like they like a little bit more of a city or closer to a college town. I mean, like a real college town, not just like a few little places here and there, but to each his own,
Yeah.
One of the things that does is it really does bond everybody together and cement relationships. So I'm not surprised about the alumni relationships being tight, because that tends to happen in environments where you don't have as much distractions from the outside world to pull you off campus. And so you're forced to sort of get close with the people that you're living with every day.
Yeah, so, Hillsdale College with a good football team, or Baylor with a little South Carolina flavor, I think it has its attractions. How's
good
that
memory,
for-
my friend. Those are some of three of our most conservative campuses we've looked at so far.
Absolutely.
Hillsdale, Baylor, and yeah. All right, so let's go for stats. Here we go. Percent accepted, I've already said that. Dave asked that already, 47%. But let's go some other stats. Total enrollment, 22,065. Total undergraduate enrollment, almost 19,000. Male, female, 51-49, so great gender balance. The SAT range, evidence-based reading and writing, 610 to 690. Math, 610 to 710. ACT, the bottom 25% is at a 27 ACT, and the 75th percentile is a 32. So a 27 to 32 would be your ACT range. 15% get the Pell Grant. I already mentioned before, 28,845 applications. 28% yield, 6-year graduation rate of 83%, very high, and a 93% freshman retention rate. So that's extremely high. Almost 19 of 20 are coming back for year 2. And the racial breakdown, 81% white, 6% black, 5.6% Latino, 4% multiracial, 2.6% Asian. Not a very international school at all. Less than 1% coming from other countries.
Monochromatic school. How about that?
Monolithic, homogenous. Yeah.
Homogenous, yes.
Yeah, when you're over 80% Caucasian, that's not
right.
Very diverse in today's world. Like I said, ROTC is really big, and that's all ROTC. Army ROTC, Air Force ROTC, all of it. All right, any final thoughts on Clemson Day before we call it a wrap?
Yeah, call it a wrap. Good football school, good academic programs, strong regional and, social bias, but it's a good school for some.
Yeah, I know it's hard for you to be objective when the politics are different than yours, but try your best to do that, because not everybody is liberal. And for people who are conservative, this can be a place that they can absolutely love. And it's a school that I wanted to highlight a little bit, because I think they have a lot to offer. I really do.
Yeah. John Calhoun was a famous slave owner whose name was excised from the halls of Yale.
Yeah, I know. As soon as I said Calhoun, Dave blanked out a little bit on me there.
Exactly.
But we have all kinds of different listeners that don't have your politics.
That's right.
That are looking for conservative schools, and I want to bring some of the best conservative schools to our listeners.
Yeah.
In fairness to Clemson, Dave, Yale just banished Calhoun's name from their records in 2017, and in 2018, Clemson launched a task force to address the same issue, and it resulted in 2020 with Clemson unanimously voting to change the name of their honors college from Calhoun College to Clemson University Honors College. And Clemson President Jim Clement said, "We want to make a very clear statement that Clemson is not represented at all by Calhoun and what he stood for." They actually went further. They committed to renaming Tillman Hall because the former South Carolina governor was an avowed white supremacist. So while it's true that the campus leans conservative, 49% were against Trump, so the non-conservative voice is half the school. And I personally see the administration proud of the fact they were the first South Carolina school to integrate, And I see them making great efforts to address their past and move forward in an inclusive manner.
Absolutely. Next week in the news, college admissions. Do you belong? An article by Brennan Bernard of Forbes. Our question from a listener is, are Pacific Coast colleges such as University of Puget Sound comparable to East Coast schools?
For our interview, Vince Garcia is back to take a look at what changes occurred with the UCs, the University of California schools, with UCLA dipping under 10% in their acceptance rate and the whole UCs experiencing a surge in applications.
And our special college spotlight in tribute of someone near and dear will be North Carolina A&T in Greensboro, North Carolina.
Okay, Dave, you're killing me with the HBCUs, man. First you couldn't get HBCU. North Carolina A&T, not AT&T. Oh, my goodness. The alumni are rolling over in their grave. Clearly, Dave is not an HBCU, guys. We know. He's thinking about his cell phone bill on me. And this is not about paying your cell phone bill.
North Carolina A. I thought that they were the ones who were rivaling North Carolina Verizon.
Awesome. All right, my friend. We'll see you next week.
Okay. Bye-bye.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please subscribe so you get every episode as soon as it is released. If you are interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on your favorite podcast listening app. I am the producer of the Your College Bound Kid podcast. Shout out to our co-hosts, Dr. David Williams and Dr. Lisa Rouff. Our sound engineer, who fixes all of our many errors, is Nemanja Montfitch. The amazing music you hear is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Our image editor is Talha Khan, and our webmaster is Stelianos Dimitri. If you want to have a college coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want to ask, or a college you want Lisa or me to do a spotlight on, or if you have a recommended resource or an article you think we should share, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. By the way, check out our website where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you, our family, next week.